The views and opinions expressed by host and guests do not necessarily reflect the views of the Global Liberty Alliance, its network, sponsors, donors, or broadcast platforms. The Global Liberty Alliance provides this podcast for informational purposes. Freedom of speech is a fundamental right and essential for free societies to prosper. Thank you for listening and supporting the mission of the Global Liberty Alliance, dedicated to strengthening and defending fundamental individual rights, free markets, and the rule of law.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Global Liberty Alliance podcast, coming to you as usual, right across the river from Washington, D.C. in Old Town, Alexandria, Virginia. So today we have another one of those tough shows, but an inspiring show. You're going to meet some remarkable advocates for Americans who are unlawfully imprisoned in foreign lands. But not only are they advocates, but these ladies have lived this in a very difficult way because they lost their dear father, Amer Fakhoury. And it's a story that I think will make you a little sad, but it will also inspire you. And it will also, I hope, for those of you who travel internationally, take some lessons away from what you need to do to prepare to be safe as possible when you go to a foreign country, no matter where you're going. So today, joining us are two of the four daughters of Micheline and Amer Fakhoury, Gila and Zoya. How are you doing?
Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for having us on your show.
Well, thank you for sharing with listeners. And are you both in New Hampshire, right?
Yes, we all live in New Hampshire.
Right. Gila and Zoya are heading up a foundation, the Fakhoury Foundation. Before we get to the foundation, I want them to share a little bit about this difficult road that the family has been on the past few years. And when we have families of Americans who have been held hostage or even former hostages, it's a difficult thing to do, but it's inspirational also because many times families would rather not do this. But once you hear this story, you will understand why the Fakhoury family has leaned into this tragedy to help other families going through this and also, of course, prevent it, which is the long-term goal of this. Before we get to that part of it, though, tell us a little bit about your story. You're all very, very talented family. I think, Gila, you're a research scientist. Zoya, you're an engineer. There's another engineer, I think, in the family. Tell us a little bit about your journey to America and tell us a little bit about Lebanon. A lot of people find that connection interesting, but don't know a lot about Lebanon. So how is it that your dad and your mom started this journey many, many years ago?
Yes, so I would like to start in the south of Lebanon. My dad was born in the south of Lebanon, a place where, unfortunately, the Lebanese government was not present. My mom and dad, they were high school sweethearts. They got married when my mom was 15 and he was 21. He, just like other members in the south, joined the South Lebanese army that was established to fight terrorist organizations like Hezbollah that were killing their families and attacking the south. Therefore, my dad joined the South Lebanese Army, SLA, in 1984, but he joined solely as a logistic officer, meaning he was responsible on making sure army officers have food and uniforms ready and ordered. He left the SLA in 1996 and opened a family business in the south of Lebanon. But unfortunately, when Hezbollah took over the south in 2000, they threatened to kill everyone associated with the SLA, the South Lebanese Army. So my dad fled to the USA in 2001, searching for peace and to raise his family that consisted of us 4 girls. My dad was the epitome of the American dream. He came here to the US with nothing. He built a family business in New Hampshire. He was loved by his community, and he took care of us 4 girls. He put us all through college. He made sure we grew up to be independent women. At the same time, he was also a political activist, supporting the Lebanese army and advocating against Hezbollah and Iran's control of Lebanon. So in the US, he met a lot of Lebanese officials when they visited the USA. He met everyone from President Michel Aoun to General Joseph Aoun of the Lebanese army. He also decided to take this vacation to Lebanon after all the encouragement from the Lebanese officials he met and Lebanese army personnel that Hezbollah is not in control of the Lebanese government anymore, and that the Lebanese government is strong and protective of its people. So this is basically his story from the South to the USA until he decided to take the trip in 2019, after my sister Zoya, the youngest of us all, graduated from University of New Hampshire. So by then he felt at ease financially to take a family vacation with my mom.
Yeah. You know, your dad seemed like someone larger than life. I mean, I never met him, but I've seen pictures of him and I've seen other interviews you've done. And he just was a guy who seemed to love life, lived it to the fullest. It seems like he never had a dull moment. And he really enjoyed, his ties to his ancestral homeland, but really wanted to live the American dream and lived it. And for you all, before we get to that trip that you mentioned, how is it for folks that maybe who have never lived in Lebanon, when someone's so outspoken like your father, because you could tell he was fearless. He didn't, he was no fan of Hezbollah. He served his country to keep those people out of there and others like them. Tell people who maybe don't know much about Lebanon, what is Hezbollah, and why does this continue to be a problem?
Hi, this is Zoya, and just to answer your question, so Lebanon, honestly, in pictures, it's beautiful. It looks like paradise, right?
Right.
And on paper, it has all these rules, regulations. It looks like it has a judicial system and everything is good. However, the reality of Lebanon is much different. And we have seen this from the recent bombing, the third biggest explosion that happened in Lebanon, and 200 people being killed and still no justice. We have seen this with the kidnapping of innocent civilians who speak out against the corrupted governments. Here in America, we have freedom of speech. We're able to judge the government if it does something incorrectly. In Lebanon, this isn't an option. If you speak out against the Lebanese government, especially Hezbollah, which was formed by the backing of Iran, you unfortunately will get kidnapped. You will get taken. And but this is covered up. You don't see this on the local media, unfortunately. But people who live in Lebanon know this. And so this is just a little bit about Lebanon. So those who are brave enough to speak out against Hezbollah usually live in America. And this is why my dad, when he came to America, he openly spoke out against Lebanon, and why he tried to avoid Lebanon for so many years, because he knew there's a possibility he could be taken. However, once he started getting closer to the Lebanese armed forces, to the Lebanese government, and officials who supposedly are not associated with Hezbollah, they encouraged him to go. They told him, why are you still so scared? Hezbollah is no longer in control of the Lebanese government. Go back home. And my dad, he wanted to see his family. His parents died in Lebanon. He never got to see them. His nephew, who he was a godfather to, also passed away at a young age in Lebanon, and he never got to see. And so he really wanted to go back home to visit his family and the ones that were remained there.
We're talking to Zoya and Gila Fakhoury, daughters of Amer Fakhoury, an American hostage in Lebanon who tragically died. We're going to talk about his ordeal in a minute, but Zoya was sharing with us a little background about this group Hezbollah. And for those of you here in the United States listening to this, who think this is just something that happens or impacts people in Lebanon, it happens right here in the Western Hemisphere. Hezbollah and Iran go down in Latin America. We have a podcast we recorded a few years ago, talks about how Hezbollah corrupt network reaches into Latin America and the Caribbean, in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, even here in the United States. So Hezbollah is a real threat. This Lebanese family Lebanese American family was targeted by Hezbollah, and Americans need to focus on this sort of thing because it impacts us right here. And, your family is deeply religious, by the way, as we haven't talked about this. You're Christians. Before we jump into your dad's story, briefly share with folks, is it safe to be a Christian in Lebanon? I mean, can people be Catholic? Like, I'm a Catholic. Can I go over there and publicly profess my faith? Or do you think you get in trouble? If you're political and you're religious, what happens to you?
If you are political and a Christian in Lebanon, you are more likely targeted by Hezbollah. Unfortunately, this has been the case. People who are Christians are more likely to be targeted in the Middle East. This isn't a new issue. It has been for years, and unfortunately, more attention should be brought on it. My dad, I strongly believe that my dad was targeted because he was an American citizen Christian that returned to Lebanon.
I believe that too. In fact, this is an interesting story about how Mr. Fakhoury and his family, it was on September the 4th, I think, 2019, right? Your family, your dad and your mom, and I think Zoya, you went with them, right? You were on that trip with them, I believe. And one of your other sisters went. And what I found very odd about this is as soon as he gets to the airport, they take away his American passport and they tell him, oh, don't worry about this. You'll get it back after you do the security check of some sort. Tell us a little bit about your arrival in Lebanon and the circumstances that led, I guess, in less than a week to his kidnapping and abduction by the security services.
Yes, so this is Gira. I will go over what happened the minute he landed in Lebanon. So he landed in Lebanon on September 4th, 2019, when at the airport, the Lebanese General Security at the airport asked to take his American passport for a routine background check. Now, my dad did not like the request and thought was suspicious. However, he called the officials that he had met in the USA, as well as Lebanese army officers. Specifically, he contacted General Yusuf Ilyes, and he told him this happened with me. He assured him that it's all routine check. They do this with other American citizens who had not been in Lebanon for many years. So he assured him nothing to worry about. Just go to the appointment given to you, and they'll give you your passport back.
So Gila, sorry to interrupt you, but they actually told your father, oh, we do this to all Americans that haven't been in the country in a long time?
Yes, that's what they told him.
Take away your passport.
Yes, they said they're going to do background check just to make sure the American passport is real. You have not been in the country for 20 years. This is all routine.
Interesting. Okay.
So when he went back, they first gave him an appointment on September 11 to go pick up his passport. He went on September 11. The officer at the Lebanese General Security of Beirut, because they told him to come pick it up at the Lebanese General Security of Beirut, he told him, we were very busy and your passport is not ready. I'm going to give you an appointment September 12 at 8 a.m. Just come back September 12 and we'll get the passport ready for you. So again, my dad was a little worried, but all the assurances said, they gave you an appointment on September 12. If they were going to take you, they would have taken you on September 11, nothing to worry about. So when he went on September 12 at 8 a.m. to redeem his passport, that's when he was kidnapped at the Lebanese General Security, and he did not get released until March 19, 2020.
Is this the General Security Service? Is this the agency headed by General Abbas Ibrahim?
Yes.
Okay. How was the rest beyond that? How was the rest of the trip? I mean, was it a good trip, uneventful trip as far as security went, or did you always feel nervous? Your dad feel nervous and your mom feel nervous about going back?
So other than that, the week he spent in Lebanon, he did go visit family. It was very emotional. However, General Yusuf always used to check on him and always kind of follow him and ask where he is and make sure he knows where my dad is at all times.
What's this fascination they had with your father, do you think?
So they claimed that it was just for his protection and that they want to make sure he's having fun in Lebanon. And if he needs anything, they're there for him. They love that he came back to Lebanon. They want to encourage other Lebanese people from the South to visit Lebanon. That's what they told him.
Interesting. Well, what happened, on that fateful day when you read that article in Al Akbar on a Hezbollah paper? Well, what happened? Because I think that's when your mom I guess that's when you first learned of your dad's abduction.
Yes. So basically, when Al Akbar news paper released this article, my dad was at the Lebanese General Security. And we were fortunate enough that when he came back, he told us everything that happened to him from the minute he entered the Lebanese General Security until he was released on March 19, 2020. So when he entered the Lebanese General Security, he was greeted kindly on September 12th and was told that his passport will be ready soon. Now, he didn't know what was going on outside. So do you want me to tell you what happened in the Lebanese General Security? Or
Yeah,
you want me to tell you
I think the people, folks listening would find this part of the story extremely interesting, because once it took a very ugly turn, but it helps to kind of give the context, because believe it or not, this pattern that you're describing of passport seizure, oh, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. This happens in many countries, and it's one of the many flags, and we'll talk about this toward the end of our podcast, about some of the lessons learned that other families can take to heart and prepare for foreign travel. When things like this happen, there's something you should be taking some remedial measures. But yes, give folks the context a little bit about what led to because then the whole process fell apart later, and it's helpful to understand what led to that.
The death of our father. Yes, so after an hour of him waiting in the Lebanese General Security, he was taken to another area where he saw people with bags on their heads were standing on the walls. And now he didn't see Lebanese army officials anymore. He saw civilians in black uniforms inside the Lebanese General Security, beating and kicking the people standing on the wall. That's when he started to feel uncomfortable. But he was told to stand until the passport is ready. So until now, they're still telling him the passport will be ready and will be given to him. Few hours passed of him standing, and then all of a sudden he was surrounded by the same civilians that were kicking the people on the wall, and they trying to handcuff him. Now here he resisted. He started to yell that he didn't do anything wrong, but then he was taken to another room where he was beaten and tortured. We later found out, after 3 months of his illegal detention, that he had 3 broken rib cages from the beating and the torture he got in the Lebanese General Security, and that he lost hearing in one of his ears.
Wow.
Now, after they took him and beat him up, they took him to the office of one of the general in the Lebanese General Security. And here he gave him a document to sign. So when my dad refused and said, I'm an American citizen, I demand my lawyer to be present, I want to read before I sign anything. That general said he held his American passport, because my dad was yelling he's an American citizen. He held his American passport and said, unfortunately, this will not help you here. And this was true, because unfortunately, the U.S. Embassy failed to locate my father for the first 48 hours. And when we asked them where his location is, they did not know. And if it was not for our Senator Jean Shaheen in New Hampshire, and the pressure she put on the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon from day one, our father would have died in the Lebanese General Security. So after they forced him to sign the document without reading, then they put him in a filthy small bathroom without food, without clean water. And he described it as there was a lot of bugs, there was a lot of mosquitoes surrounding him, and the bathroom was really, really small. And when he asked for water, he was forced to drink dirty water. So after the pressure that Senator Shaheen put, he was finally transferred to a prison underground, the military prison. And that was his journey from the minute he entered the Lebanese General Security until he was transferred to the military prison.
We're talking to Gila Fakhoury and Zoya Fakhoury, daughters of Amer Fakhoury, about the brutal kidnapping, torture, and death of their father and husband in Lebanon in the hands of the security services. This is what a difficult story to not only listen to, but it must be so hard for you to tell. And you're blessed in the sense that at least you were able to get an accounting. And folks listening to this, they can tell this story because they were able to speak to their father, thanks to the good efforts of the U.S. government and certain leaders in the U.S. government, like Senator Shaheen, who were champions and made sure that they kept the pressure on the Lebanese to release him. And then they were able to get this testimony from him. If not, who knows what would have happened, and maybe would have never learned this, these horrible details about how they treated an American citizen. And I suspect there are other Americans or U.S. legal residents who've gone through similar ordeals that we don't know about. And it should make everyone listening to this very upset that an American citizen was treated this way by a so-called ally of the United States, where billions and billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars are sent, where we arm the military, where we support the government, where we train the military. Sometimes I believe some of our weapons end up in the hands of Hezbollah too. But American taxpayers need to know this, because our money goes there. And we need to shine a light on this sort of abuse. When it comes to Americans, it needs to be hands off. And Senator Shaheen made very clear. In fact, that's how I learned about this case, through the advocacy of Senator Shaheen, who from the very beginning was very engaged in trying to ensure that this was resolved quickly. And it's frankly how all hostage cases should be resolved quickly, not years, but weeks, if not months. Unfortunately, your father became very ill. What do you think ultimately happened? Why do you think that they let him go? Was it the U.S. pressure, or was it they feared that maybe Mr. Fakhoury would die in custody? I mean, what ultimately do you think was the pivotal moment when this happened?
Yes, so after he was transferred to the military prison, 2 weeks into his illegal detention, he started feeling pain in his stomach. And when he expressed that to the prison doctor, that was paid by the Lebanese government, I would like to add, they brushed it off as it's mental, it's stress. It took 3 months until our international lawyer, Chris Reed, went to see my dad. That was in November. And after immense pressure for him to actually see him face to face, then he found out that my dad lost 80 pounds. So Chris knew my dad before in America. He was a friend of the family. He went and saw my dad lost 80 pounds. He was dying in the prison. So he went immediately to Ambassador, I believe Richards at that time, and told her, this man is dying. This is not mental. This man requires immediate medical attention. So it took 3 months for my dad to get any medical treatment and any medical attention, because unfortunately, and this is something that hopefully will not happen again, and we learned a lesson from this, that the embassy in Beirut listened to the doctor of the prison. Instead of listening to my dad when he expressed pain, he was not able to lie down for 3 months. He was not able to eat. He was crying from pain with no pain medication. And this also a part of the torture. He had no pain medication. He had no medical treatment. It was not until Chris Reed saw that he was dying that he was transferred to a hospital. And it wasn't the best hospital. It was the military hospital. The food in the military hospital was expired as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad you raised this. I want listeners to focus on this because she has said so much here. Let's take a step back briefly to what you said about the U.S. Embassy. Folks who listen to this podcast and who know about the work the Global Liberty Alliance has done, great organizations like the Foley Foundation, and of course now the Amer Fakhoury Foundation and others, there's no greater duty for the U.S. Embassy in any of these countries to come to the defense of an American in need. U.S. Department of State, United States. It's not the World Department of State. It's the U.S. Department of State. And we don't have time today to talk about all of this in too much detail, but one thing that they're supposed to do, consular officials, people who work in the building at the embassy, is supposed to check in on Americans who are locked up in foreign countries. How many times did Ambassador Richard or somebody at the U.S. Embassy go visit your father personally at the prison?
So consular from the embassy would go visit him once every 2 weeks. However, when he expressed the pain that he was having, they would always go back to the prison doctor and say, what is your report? and give us your report about Amer Fakhoury's pain condition. And the prison doctor, he was paid by the Lebanese government, who is controlled by Hezbollah. So always his report was, it's mental. And my mom, when she went and my dad told her, I'm in so much pain, I can't eat. And that was toward November, before Chris Reed went to see him. He told her, she went to the doctor and she said, how can you say it's mental? My husband is dying. There's no way this is mental. And we expressed this to the embassy many times.
And what did they, and what did they tell you?
They would always refer back to the doctor's report. And that was the biggest mistake, because by the time my dad was actually taken to a proper hospital, it was not until December. And when they did an examination, they found the Epstein-Barr virus and H. pylori virus in his body at very high viral load, that it led to a stage 4 B-cell lymphoma.
I mean, your dad, I've seen pictures of your father before and after, and he didn't look well in the pictures that were taken at the hospital. And it's amazing that, forget about the pictures, we don't rely on Hezbollah, we don't rely on terrorists and evildoers for our information. And thank God you had a brave lawyer, advocate, who went there and made sure that he had a voice and that people paid attention, because it shouldn't be this hard, folks. Okay, we pay taxes to the Department of State. Okay, we pay taxes to fund the federal government. And this was clearly a case of an American unlawfully detained. And it's quite appalling to hear that they were playing politics with this man's life. And thank God we had people like Senator Shaheen and some others. How was it as far as dealing with, this whole experience for the family, this, jumping into something like this, going there for a family vacation, trying to reconnect with your ancestral roots and your homeland, your ancestral homeland, turning into this nightmare? How was it dealing with, did you think you had the help you needed as far as the U.S. government was concerned? I mean, a lot of times the U.S. government can't get involved in all of these cases, but this was not an ordinary detention case. This was I believe, a high profile, unlawful detention. It was not as if your father was pulled over for speeding or drunk driving. And this is, by the way, folks, when you travel overseas, you have to prepare. You have to respect the laws of the country you're in. And one of the things you should take away from any of these testimonials and cases, you may not want to be, Uncle Sam may not come to your defense as much as you think they can or should. And sometimes they can't, because if you break the laws of a foreign country, you are subject to those laws and you're entitled to due process, but it could be a long process. However, there are cases like these, which in my book are kidnapping and unlawful detentions. It started that way at the airport. Do you think the U.S. government did everything they could have done to help save your dad?
I definitely think they could have done more. If my father was gotten out earlier, he would still be alive today. The delayment in his treatment is what caused his death. He was under physical and mental stress the entire time. I do think the U.S. Embassy should do a better job at listening to the American citizen that is being detained, rather than the doctor that is being paid for by, unfortunately, a corrupted government. They could have gotten my dad out earlier. One thing I do want to focus on is I found it incredibly strange how the U.S. Embassy was unable to locate my father. So after my dad went to the general security and never came back home, this is when we started to be frantic and running around not knowing what to do. We called the U.S. Embassy and they said they were going to go get him and all this. We get a call from the U.S. Embassy later that night, so after several hours of my dad not coming back home, and they told us they were unable to locate him and they're going to continue the next day searching for him. How does the U.S. Embassy not able to locate a man that is supposedly at a Lebanese government location? Like you said, Lebanon is supposedly an ally. We've sent millions of dollars to Lebanon. Why is the Lebanese General Security being controlled by Lebanon, our ally, or is it being controlled by Hezbollah?
Well, definitely they could have, Ambassador Richard could have picked up the phone and called Abbas Ibrahim and said, you better produce this American now, there's going to be some consequences.
Exactly. So we do think the delayment is what caused our father's death. And to be honest, during my father's detainment, it was awful for the family. And this is something that's always the family is always sometimes overlooked in these cases. But me and my sisters here in America, we were receiving constant death threats from Hezbollah supporters every day.
Oh, backtrack a minute. You never told us that.
Yeah.
Your family was receiving death threats here?
We still are receiving death threats. But when my father was taken and this story was made to the public, and me and my sister Macy, who were on vacation with my family, we had to go back to America for work. And every day we would receive messages from Hezbollah supporters telling us we're next, telling us they're coming to kill us. Me and my sisters got extreme PTSD from what happened. We would be paranoid. Every time a car drove by or stood outside of our house, we would call the police because we were so scared that someone was coming to kill us.
That's amazing. And that's compounds everything that y'all went through. I mean, it must have been a relief, I guess, but a scary one at that, when your dad was finally allowed to leave. When did you learn, and how did you learn that he was finally coming home?
So after extreme pressure from the US government and Senator Shaheen, and then later on, Senator Cruz joined forces with Senator Shaheen and really stressed the importance of, if my dad died in Lebanon, it's going to affect the Lebanon-US relation. Then the judiciary system, although it was controlled by Hezbollah and there was no evidence whatsoever for his detention, finally in March, the judge said, oh, there's no evidence, Amer can be released. However, I would like to note that even though the judge said we have no evidence for detaining Amer Fakhoury and he's allowed to go back home, Hezbollah put a red flag on his name to not be allowed to leave the Lebanese airport. So my dad, although he was technically released from jail on March 12th, he took protection in the US Embassy. And by then, ambassador changed. It was Ambassador Shea. And she hosted them in her house from March 12th to March 19th until the US sent a team to bring them home. So even when he was released, we were still in fear that they won't let him leave Lebanon. And because Hezbollah put a red flag that he was not allowed to leave the airport.
That's God, I don't know if that makes me angry. That makes me angrier. I mean, it's truly outrageous that pretty much he was a hostage within a hostage in Lebanon, in a country that, again, like I shared with listeners earlier, we share billions in US taxpayer money every year, hundreds of millions every year. We've sent billions down there in defense spending, and that this family had to go through this ordeal and perhaps preventable tragedy had we leaned in a little harder. I hope that you all continue to unmask this process, because you could have stayed quiet and your family could have deservedly and rightly so taken time to heal, mourn, but you've decided as a family to turn this tragedy into an experience to educate others, raise awareness, and started a foundation in your father's name. We'll provide links to this on the program note page, the Amer Fakhoury Foundation. What's the mission of your group, and why did you decide to publicly discuss this case and help other families caught in this situation?
Yeah, so one of the reasons, I want to start by saying why we created this foundation. So it was actually my dad's idea. When my dad returned from Lebanon, he said he was really scarred by what he saw at the Lebanese General Security. And he knew there were other people like him who were innocent and being taken. And he wanted to create some type of platform that spoke on behalf of these people who didn't have a voice, who didn't have anyone advocating for them. And so when my dad died, we immediately got to work. We did not want my dad's death to go in vain, to be swept under the rug and forgotten. We wanted to raise awareness on what happened and help other people going through something similar.
So one of our missions is to advocate for hostages and illegally detained individuals. We stand with these families both emotionally and financially. And those are two things we struggled a lot with as we went through this. Many people don't understand the financial burden that is put on the family as they go through this. There's cost of lawyers, cost of sending care packages to the family, taking care of the bills that is left behind by the detained loved one, and so on. And so right now we are still a small foundation that's trying to grow, but we do our best to fundraise for these families and help them as much as we can, whether it's covering a month's rent or sending money to cover food and other necessities that are needed by the detained victim. We're hoping as we grow, we can set up a proper program for these families of hostages to be helped financially. And we also,
When families go through this ordeal, it puts an immense amount. First of all, you're not really prepared. The last thing that would dawn on someone when you're traveling somewhere is that you'd be unlawfully imprisoned, much less by a group like Hezbollah. The financial strain, the emotional strain, you all were threatened. It pretty much shifts your whole life. You have like two lives to lead. You got to keep your home going, and you also have to then advocate for your father in this case. How do you balance that? What advice do you give families, for example, that are still going through this? And there are hundreds, perhaps more American families going through this type of an ordeal. Like, how did you all cope with it?
Yeah, it was incredibly hard, honestly, in the beginning. So like I said, me and my sisters, we all work. So we had to balance going to that 9-to-5 job and then still balancing worrying about our father. What's going on with this case? Did he end up dead? Did anyone threaten my mom, who was still in Lebanon at the time? So all these thoughts are running through our minds. And so, like I said, we did get a lot of PTSD from this, and it was emotionally hard. And we didn't have anyone that stood next to us during this time and told us what the process to go through. Now, luckily, there has been way more help for these hostage victims, and there are programs that they can utilize to help them as they go through this. So that is great that has changed. But like I said, it was very hard. And to balance this, you have to speak out. When a loved one is detained, you are tethered to their case. The loved one is detained, and so are you, because every day all you think about is this case and what's happening with it. And so just to speak out and don't stay silent. Like I said, we have received threats to stay silent, but at the end of the day, our father's dead, and we didn't get any justice for what happened.
Let me ask you something about staying silent. A lot of times the U.S. government, and you're right, by the way, and for folks, we're talking to Zoya and Gila Fakhoury about the hostage incident of their father who died because the Lebanese government failed, and the U.S. government, in my opinion, failed to come to quick aid and release of this man who was unlawfully detained in Lebanon. We're talking to 2 of his 4 daughters. The staying silent part. I know many families who are told by the U.S. government, stay quiet, it'll be better. In some cases, the lawyer in me says, and there are situations where there are times to be quiet, and there are times, though, not to be quiet. Most cases, silence is the tool of the oppressor, and it's not indicated, but you have to take it case by case. But after all of this, do you think it's a good idea in most cases to stay quiet when these things happen?
We believe that people need to speak out. I remember very well, it was before my dad got released. They told us to stay quiet, and they were working a deal with the Lebanese government. And the deal was to let him stay until June, when the president, Michel Aoun, so just say you're guilty, will charge you, and then the president, Michel Aoun, will pardon you. And I remember very well, we had an interview at Fox coming up, and they told us, do not talk about the case, just talk about how good your father is, how sick he was. And when we went on Fox, I said, and me and my sister, we said, we're not gonna be silent. So we told everyone how we are paying money to Lebanon, and my dad is sick and is dying, and they're telling us just to wait until June. And by June, my dad would have been dead in Lebanon. And talking about this really changed the outcome and really pushed the US government to work harder and got my dad released in March 2020. And I believe this saved his life, because if we waited until June, my dad would have died in Lebanon. With all the treatment he had at best cancer facilities here in the US, my dad died on August 17, 2020, because the cancer was so aggressive by the time he was released. So imagine waiting and following the plan they had initially.
You know, one of the, go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's definitely a case-by-case basis. And in our situation, speaking out was what helped save our father.
You know, we've helped families on and off over many years. This is the way I describe it is you're stuck between two very powerful, in your case, three very powerful influences that just converged. So you have, in your case, Iran, the United States, and Lebanon. And imagine this is bigger than a David versus Goliath battle. You have three Goliaths and you're one David, right? So it's, and then you're stuck in the middle. And then the governments don't want to tell you what's going on. You get into these circular conversations, even for the lawyers, you know, the advocates. This is a very difficult space because they don't even want to share information with you because they'll say things like, oh, state security, national security, you know, the vagaries of diplomacy. Look, I get it. Governments have to do what they have to do, but in my mind, there's no bigger priority for America than the protection of their foreigners, of our nationals. I mean, it's a life is more important than any diplomatic doublespeak or any national security issue. Saving Americans is the only mission, I believe, of the State Department, and that takes a very broad definition. And I know the State Department can't be everywhere at the same time, but people take precautions, people do things. This family stepped up and they bravely leaned in and they did a remarkable job and they saved their father's life. They brought him home. Now you have this mission, now you have this organization, and we're going to share this link with folks. I encourage you to go to the website, the Amer Fakhoury Foundation.org website, donate to them. There's a lot that they need help with. They're trying to help people going through this right now. As we wrap up the show, we thank you so much for sharing this story with us and spending time with us. Can you share with our listeners some of the lessons learned, either if you're a family going through this or people planning to travel to places like Lebanon or places maybe that don't have the best due process protection for Americans? What advice would you give them?
If you are traveling overseas and anyone asks to take your passport, go immediately to the US Embassy and don't listen to anyone. I think that's one of the biggest lessons we've learned. And another one is do not underestimate Hezbollah's influence in countries like Lebanon. We have strong allies on the ground in Lebanon who are working with us to help shed light on Hezbollah's influence in Lebanon, which is unfortunately being ignored by the international community. Hezbollah is in every sector of the Lebanese government, and we witnessed this firsthand. We have multiple stories of our experience with the president of Lebanon, different judges in the Lebanese judicial system who are heavily influenced by Hezbollah. So that's a big lesson that we need to focus on and we need to shed more light on.
You know, one of the things that we're doing of an organization, the Global Liberty Alliance, and we don't announce who we're working with, but we do collaborate with some lawyers in Lebanon, human rights lawyers, people who, and this says a lot, right? We can't share who we're working with because we don't want the Lebanese government or Hezbollah knowing what we're doing. But there's a lot of great patriots left in Lebanon, people who want to take their country back from these people. And the fact that lawyers have to work in secret with an American NGO to do accountability work says a lot about the state of the Lebanese state right now, which is not very, very good. And the fact that your father had his passport yanked from him, and we wasted so much time considering how much we invested there, is truly outrageous. And I'm glad that you folks are leaning in on this. And they're right. You should go to the embassy right away. And also there's a program called the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program that everyone traveling overseas, no matter where you're going, we encourage people to register before you travel, enroll, get information about safety conditions of where you're going. It also helps the U.S. Embassy track you down in cases of emergencies like civil unrest and natural disasters. I mean, it's not a insurance policy, if you will, but it's a way to tell the State Department where you happen to be. Some people don't like to do it. I'm a big privacy guy, but you have to take reasonable precautions. And if you make it hard for your government to track you down, it slows down the process. And read up on where you're going too. Learn a lot about the home of the place you're visiting. Learn a little bit about their legal system. Some people get insurance when they go to these places, but every country is different. You got to take precautions. And as you heard this story today, we've been speaking with Gila and Zoya Fakhoury about their family's mission to help Americans who are stuck as hostages or unlawfully imprisoned persons. Gila, Zoya, thank you so much for spending time with us. Is there anything else you want to share with folks? And we're going to direct them to your website, of course, but is there anything else you want to share as we close up?
Yeah, I would just like to ask anyone who's listening to this to really check out our website and read up on what our mission is all about and just support our cause, because this is one of the biggest issues that is going on right now that isn't talked about enough. And just support us so we can help other American families not go through what we went through.
Well, thank you very much, Gila and Zoya. Regards to Micheline and Macy and Amanda and all your family. And thank you for what you're doing. And thank you, folks, for listening. We'll be back next week with some more programs on the Global Liberty Alliance podcast. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all. Hello, fellow Liberty Warriors. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. It's free for starters. There's also an awesome creation tool. If you don't want to hire a producer right away, you can record and edit your podcast right from your phone, right from your computer, anywhere you are at any time. It's distributed for you. So that's really important. Once you record this, you need to get it to the right platform. They will do that for you, including on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many, many more. You can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast. It's all in one place. It's very easy to use. So give Anchor a try. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's anchor.fm to get started.